Good afternoon. My name is Twyla Albrecht, and I'd like to welcome you to the second webinar in our 2019 series, Speaking of Nonprofit Boards. This afternoon, we've invited MHS Consulting Associate Emerson Lesher to talk with us about preparing for executive transition. After we hear from Emerson, we'll have some time at the end for question and answer, so please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen there. I'd like to begin with a brief introduction to Emerson. Emerson works with organizations to support them in advancing their strategic direction and organizational health. He has more than 30 years of executive and clinical experience in nonprofit aging services and behavioral health care. Emerson is skilled in helping organizations identify what they are doing well, determine how to meet needs, and move forward in a way that fits their mission and values. Thank you for sharing with us today, Emerson. Let's go ahead and dive in. Good.
Thank you, Twyla, and hopefully everyone is hearing me. It's nice to have this opportunity to be together today. I'm getting over a cold or something, and I hope I am, and that's one of the advantages, I guess, of a webinar is you can't be contagious. So, but hopefully it won't be too annoying to you. But I'm very happy to be here today and to talk on this topic that comes out of MHS's work over many years of helping with executive transitions, and also my work with organizations and my own personal experience in working on boards and as a CEO. So I look forward to your comments. I'm going to try to talk for 20 minutes or less, and then we'll have time for your questions and comments as well. So I look forward to that. So we will be using the PowerPoint and today to help us go through this a bit. What I wanted to start with in terms of the topic that I was asked to address is really how CEOs and boards could work together. And so that's what I want to focus on a bit, is sort of that relationship, because it is important in terms of the what I will call the outgoing CEO, or you could think of as the current CEO, and the board of directors. And really, I think for a great transition, it really starts a long time before that process is in place of building a trusting relationship between the CEO and the board, to have open, honest discussions. And so that's important for both the CEO to initiate that relationship as well as the board to initiate that kind of relationship. I think it's also important at some level, it's not something you need to do every day, but to have an awareness that of the board's part, the CEO will not be here forever. We like them now, we're happy to have them, but someday we'll have a different CEO. So times I work with boards, you get the sense that they never think that they'll ever have a different CEO. And I've also worked with CEOs who think they're going to be there forever. I'm not sure how that's going to work out for them, but there's a sense of being open to change, to realizing it will be different someday. The other thing is to realize that there are different roles. And I've seen confusion over this at times, that sometimes people, the board might assume that the CEO is going to pick the next CEO. Sometimes the CEO assumes that they're going to pick their successor. There's other ways in which the roles sometimes get confusing. And so it's just important to remember there are different roles in this relationship. And also to be honest with each other between the board and the CEO, both celebrating what's great, what's working well, to acknowledge that, and to also acknowledge maybe what's not working well, or to say, how can we make this better? And that's both on the board's part. Sometimes the board is not doing everything they can do to make it a positive experience for the CEO. So the CEO starts thinking about a transition when they really like that, maybe the organization, but they're not happy, they're not excited about the board. Or sometimes the board is saying, hey, this person is not delivering what we want. And so how can you have those discussions? So, and not surprising the person all of a sudden and making a decision. So it's part of this building this trusting relationship, that there aren't surprises, both that the board is not surprised by something and the CEO is not surprised. Just a bit on what the CEO might do to prepare. Obviously asking if they're not getting a regular feedback, often annual, to keep asking themselves, am I the right person? Am I really doing everything that this organization needs at this time? Those are good things for CEOs to do in preparing for their own transition, and to be thinking about, and even to say, does the board think I'm meeting the needs? The other thing, I call it a soft notice, is that there may be ways to indicate, and we can get into the discussion if you like, that a change is coming. I'm thinking, for whatever, maybe it's based on, I'm thinking about retirement, my family is changing. There are a variety of ways to start maybe giving notice to the board without saying that on a precise date, I'm going to retire or resign, but sometimes that's helpful. And also to keep building the senior team. And we'll get into that a bit more, but I think that's important preparation to have a strong team when you're thinking about a transition. And it's also helpful for the CEO to be open and to be helpful in helping the board setting up a succession plan or transition policy. You can call it different things, and not to be defensive about that, to not think the board is, trying to get rid of them or something, but it's just good board governance. It's good operational best practice to have a policy like that in place. Some things that the board should be doing to help prepare for a transition, and again, this is before things really start happening, is to have a policy, to have some type of understanding of what we will do in what I call an unplanned transition. That could be due to health, it could be due to things that happen suddenly you're not expecting that might happen. It could be because the board is not happy, and all of a sudden you're making a change for performance. There may be an ethical or moral issue that the board is saying we have to make an unplanned transition. So there should be something in place that sort of guides the board through that process. And also, obviously, there should be a policy for what I call a planned transition, which is usually more in a resignation or retirement that guides the board. And I think it's often helpful as a part of the regular review process with the CEO, at least the chair, is that there is, again, sort of a soft ask of how are we doing? Are you thinking about a change? What are your plans? There's different ways that you can sort of ask that question without, again, making the CEO give a hard answer. It's more getting some sense of where's this relationship at? How is the CEO seeing this fitting into their life course? And so forth. And so that can be helpful in terms of you begin to prepare. And again, it's sort of trying to minimize the surprise, trying to help both the CEO and the board do this in a good way. And keep among the board itself, in executive session and other times, does this CEO have what we need? And that's an legitimate question in terms of beginning to prepare both how much longer should this current CEO be with us? That's sort of a decision, but also maybe even what type of CEO we might need as we think about the future. And the board also can be encouraging the CEO to really build a strong team around them. And that's good for a couple things. One is there may be somebody that emerges out of that is the next CEO. So it's part of the succession plan in a sense. But it also can be, if there's not somebody who's going to be promoted from within, just during a transition, it's great to have strong people who are there, who know the organization, who can help through that, the process of transition. So I'm going to get now into some of the actual sort of phases of an actual transition. I've been talking so far more about preparing, getting ready, that may be years in advance of an actual transition. But here, I want to just talk a little bit about a quick overview of both the board and the CEO in terms of some things that they might do to help things go well, to have a good transition. It's important at some point, again, that the CEO actually gives to the board and the board receives a written letter of resignation, and it also should include an end date, like I'm going to end on X date. I've known of situations where there's not a written letter, and so it's not always clear, is this person did they actually tell us that? What did they actually say? And when are they actually thinking they're going to leave? And so it just gets awkward. And so this is just good HR kind of practice to have this. Sometimes there is back and forth before this actual written letter is given, and that's fine for the board and the CEO or the chair and the CEO to have some discussion of what would be a good time, what works for both parties. That's great, that's fine. But at some point, there should be, this should be documented and formalized in some way. And then the CEO and the chair should also be having a discussion about how to roll out this announcement, both within the board and then throughout the organization. And that is really important, especially for larger organizations, but even smaller. This helps to really set a tone that we're organized, we know how to do this, we're able to handle this. It builds confidence. And so making sure you have a rollout plan, announcement plan, that it's often sequential in some way or cascading. And then once that's, you're announcing and you're sort of formal, yes, there is a retirement or resignation, to then actually implement the policy that you've already put in place. And so that might mean forming a search committee or search process. It may involve, today, many organizations would hire a search firm. And so it would be starting that process. And this is more, the last bullet point here is more just a reminder, because sometimes I'm sort of surprised that people don't realize this, that whenever that goes public, it really, I call it a new zone. People are sort of in a new place. And that's the board, it's the organization, the CEO. And, it's a time where some people are denying what's happening. And sometimes it's the CEO that's denying it. Sometimes it's the board. Sometimes people are scared. Sometimes people are expressing gratitude to the CEO. Sometimes people are scared. Sometimes people, frankly, are conniving. There's a whole host of things that often begin to happen. And it's really sort of a different point in organizational life. And to not be aware of that as CEO, as board, as senior team, often we can run into some trouble there in terms of just being clear with each other, being helpful to each other, and to realize it's not the same. It's just not. Prior to that, we sort of thought this person is going to be here for a long time or indefinitely. Now, all of a sudden, things are different and we don't know, we're not sure what's going to happen. And so some of that is appropriate in terms of the unknown, but it's just to be aware of it. I want to move now into, after the announcement has taken place, it's sort of what I call a recruitment phase. This is either a search committee or a search firm is sort of leading through this. And part of the preparation for the board or the search committee is that there's going to be more time involved. This is not normal board life. That's part of the new zone that they enter, is realizing, hey, we maybe before we met X amount, but we're probably going to have to double, triple that and for a while to get done everything that we need to get done, because one of our most important jobs is selecting the CEO. So one of the best practices is just to realize, hey, you got to ante up and to make sure that you have people on the committee, on the search committee particularly, that are prepared for that. To expect there's going to be starting to be limited information shared between the CEO and the search committee. Sometimes that takes a while for the CEO or the search committee to realize, hey, we have different roles here, and it's not appropriate for us to be sharing everything. And so part of it is learning what's appropriate to share, what's not. But it's probably going to be less and less. Some CEOs get concerned about that, but hey, again, they're at a new place. And the search committee, sometimes, if they've been overly dependent upon the CEO, they're continuing to want to go back and reconnect in a way that maybe is not helpful. It's often helpful, though, to have one person, and sometimes it's the board chair or another person who is periodically keeping the CEO informed. That can be in a general way. They're not necessarily mentioning candidate names, but they're just saying, this is where we're at in the process, this is what's happening. And sometimes it's helpful for them to ask the CEO certain questions about the organization or just things they're not sure about. And so it provides a link and a liaison, and that can be very good. The CEO may be requested, as I just indicated, to provide certain information about the organization, a summary, a strategic plan, a variety of things. And really probably what's most important during this phase is that the board and CEO have a good discussion about what projects should we keep going at full speed, which ones do we put on hold, which ones do we slow down, which ones do we speed up. So that discussion needs to happen between the chair, well, maybe the chair and the CEO, but at least the board and CEO. The next phase I call the selection phase, where the search committee and the board are actually down to a couple of candidates, one candidate, and where the candidates have been identified and processed in certain ways, and you've identified who you're going to invite. My experience is that most CEOs are not involved in the interview process of their successor, of the new CEO, and often don't know who is even being considered. Some boards may want to do this. I would enter into that. I would do it cautiously. Likewise, both in the bullet points here, I talk about maybe a paper review that may be appropriate. Sometimes they also have them actually interview the person. I think on both of those, I would do them cautiously. And part of it is the board needs to begin to realize we are responsible for the next CEO and not the outgoing CEO. And it's our task. That's what we're here for. And we need to take responsibility for this. And it's really sort of our thing. Usually the senior team is not involved. I typically do not recommend that. Often senior teams want to be, and sometimes boards want them to be. There's a variety of reasons, and we can get into that if you'd like, in terms of why I might recommend that. And then sometimes, though, in the selection process, it is appropriate. Boards may ask the CEO or the HR person to tell them more about benefits and those kinds of things, because the top candidate is asking about those things. And sometimes it's actually related to the offer letter that you actually put in. These are your benefits. This is what you would get. And so they need that kind of information that the board doesn't always have. And then so part of this phase is to actually have a signed, some would call it an offer letter, different words you might, it may not be the final document that you have, the final employment agreement or the final letter of employment, but it is a letter that outlines some of the general terms and probably a start date and so forth. And often we would recommend that the search committee have this before they take the top candidate to the full board, so that you know that you have, and it would be contingent upon full board approval, but that you do have someone who is serious, that's ready to move forward if the board indeed approves. So then we have, after the top candidate has been identified, you have them sign appropriate document, and you work on the rollout. And again, this is very important to have often a cascading communication rollout of who, what, when, and where that's going to happen. Some people use electronic means to do that. Others use email, paper, in-person, variety of things. And sometimes it's good to use all those depending upon the type of organization. I find that it's a good courtesy and helps to set things off if, as soon as that person has been engaged, the new CEO, that the outgoing CEO is informed of who it is, and so that they're not surprised by the announcement, so that they hopefully can, their response when it does go public, they can say, I think this is a wonderful person. I think the board used a good process. I look forward to helping them in the transition. I think that's just a good professional courtesy, and it really helps the outgoing CEO feel a part of this, and they can join in celebrating this new person. It's also, I think, helpful to, as much as possible, as soon as possible, include the senior team. I've seen this sometimes where it happens on the day it goes public. Before it actually goes public, the senior team is called together. If possible, you have the new CEO appear, be there for an hour or so, meet and greet, and so that when they leave the room and when it goes public, they can say, I've met this person. I think they'll do very well here. They have a great background in X, Y, and Z. Again, it just builds confidence in the transition, in the selection. It helps the new CEO. It helps the board. Rather than, I've seen some senior teams say, yeah, we heard about this person, but we've never met them. I don't know what they're really like. I mean, so it doesn't build confidence in that selection process. And so some other things here in terms of that we can talk about if you'd like, in terms of one of the things in this announcement phase is to also celebrate the CEO, the outgoing CEO, and to announce how that will be done, when that will be done, and for the outgoing CEO to help really orient in terms of logistics and some things. Just a couple of quick things, and then I'll stop here. In terms of what I call hello and goodbye practices, I sort of joke about this, but I recommend 20 hours of overlap between the ingoing and the outgoing CEO. Some people think that's not enough. Other people think it's too much, but that's sort of a rule of thumb. And some of that could happen before the outgoing actually leaves. Some of that could happen after. And I think sometimes it's good to have some of both, because sometimes the incoming CEO realizes, hey, I really should have asked them about X, Y, and Z. So a lunch or breakfast a couple weeks after or a month after may actually be more helpful. So we do not recommend long periods of overlap. Hopefully the outgoing CEO uses this as a time to express gratitude. I think that's helpful for their own life and well-being, and also is helpful to the organization. The board, so what do they need to do during this time is to really say how wonderful, how great transition we've had here, what great CEOs, how helpful they've been, list some areas, both the outgoing and incoming. And to also really use this as a time to highlight the mission and values, and to say essentially we're more than a CEO. This is what we're about. This is our purpose, and really emphasize the culture, the values, and so forth. These are just some other things here in terms of the outgoing CEO. Often they write maybe a personal note, leave it on the desk when they leave. It's important for them to have a plan, both the sort of immediate and long term. We can talk about it also in the discussion of about separation. I think that's often important, that the outgoing CEO not be around much for a while. Part of the best practices here is also for the board and the incoming CEO to have an understanding of what might happen over the next year in terms of some coaching, some orientation, and that kind of thing. And then also have some incoming receptions, welcome events. Again, it depends on the organization, but to have some ways for people to get to know the new CEO, maybe with donor groups, with community groups, and to really sort of highlight this person and welcome them. So I know that's fast, but we're going to stop there and see what questions you might have or comments. And I would look to Twyla to help lead us through this part.
Sure. Thank you, Emerson. We do have a number of questions coming in, so please continue to use the Q&A tab to ask questions here for the last few minutes. We'll start with one from a participant who says, I'd like to hear more about why you don't recommend involving the CEO and senior team in reviewing candidates.
I think one of the things, a couple things maybe, but obviously it's done different ways and it can be successful in a variety of ways. But I think one of the things that's important that I did mention, it's important for the board to realize they are responsible now for the next CEO. They need to feel like this was our decision. This was not the last CEO's decision, and now we have to live with it. It just builds in more accountability, more ownership, more engagement from the board to realize this is their responsibility. I mean, all board governance would say this is, one of the most important things that a board does. And so sometimes outgoing CEOs have, quite frankly, I know it's hard to imagine, but they may have an agenda, they may have a friend, and that may or may not be helpful to the organization. Sometimes they're internal candidates, and sometimes that with the outgoing CEO, it may or may not be helpful to that internal candidate and to the rest of the team and the board to be weighing in. Sometimes I think a CEO knows one or two of the candidates, and it may give an advantage to that person that other candidates don't have, or a disadvantage. I know I've been in a situation where the board asked me essentially, we know you know this person really well, so what are their problems? Well, I said, I'm not going to answer that because that's not really fair to them. I think they're a wonderful person, but then you're gonna base it on that versus not realizing other candidates may have problems that are just as great. You're not looking at it in a equal way, in a way that's really helpful process. So that's some of the reasons, and that I would say. The other is in terms of the senior team. Let me just add this too: is that I've also seen where you have a senior team of 6. 3 say, yeah, this one person is great, hire them. The other 3 say no. That's not a good situation for the new CEO. It doesn't set them up well to really enter the organization in a positive way. And so that's one of the big reasons why often senior teams are not involved, because you get mixed impressions, and it's not really helpful to the new CEO in that way. So anyhow, that's some of my thoughts. I know there are other perspectives. Is there another question?
Thank you. Yes, we do have another question here, wondering, does MHS Consulting help with executive searches? And if so, can you talk a little bit more about that process and timeline?
Sure. MHS Consulting does do executive searches. Many MHS organizations have used MHS over the years, and this is an active part of the consulting practice. So we do this. We're happy to do it, and hope that it's helpful to others. And so we work. We have sort of a variety of ways that we can work with organizations. There's sort of a full-scale search process that we will help with. There's also, we can do certain pieces in terms of depending upon what the organization might like. So there's different ways it can be structured. For a lot of organizations, we often say you probably need 12 months, or that's a good plan to be thinking about that. Obviously, some successful ones have been done in 6 months, and that's great. But often till you actually announce that the person is leaving, until you get a search committee together, you get everything lined up, and sort of figure out exactly a new job description maybe, and a variety of things, and then you start advertising, until you do interviews and so forth. It can take a year. I know it sounds like a long time, but that's not unusual. And as I say, we've done it shorter than that, but that's a good time period to be thinking about. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think one of the advantages that MHS brings is a faith-based approach, understanding that, trying to find a good fit in terms of the culture and the faith perspective, knowing candidates who might bring that as well. But we do advertise or recruit not only through Mennonite and Anabaptist related groups, but also a wider net than that. And so we interact in sort of both areas, both the Anabaptist related church network, organizational network, as well as other faith-based networks. So we're not just limited to that. Hopefully that's helpful. And Elisa Miller, you should talk with her, who's our managing director, if you would like to get more information about that. Maybe we have another question or two.
Yes, I think we do have time for one more here before we close. This question comes from a participant asking, if we don't have the ideal candidate in the first run, how does a second search impact upon the pool of candidates?
Yes. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes, you're going down a road and you have several candidates that you think are very worthy and would make excellent persons, and for a variety of reasons they step out, or you find out things and you say no. And so we typically we have been in those situations and work with that and try to approach it. So sometimes it is sort of re-advertising, sending out more. Sometimes it's taking a more strategic approach to certain persons or certain groups, and really sort of trying to attract in a different way. So we've done both of those. I think, what's most important ultimately is that you have the right person. And so sometimes it takes a while, or you go through a process and you wish it would be faster. But what's most important, I would say sometimes on that second round, like essentially we were doing a second round, we have found that there are people who show up who weren't ready when we were doing it the first time, who were great people. And it's just, they made a decision or something in their life happened, or their organization, something happened, and now they're looking, but they weren't, 3 or 4 months ago. So it doesn't mean that you're getting a lesser quality. It just means there are different people who at that point are ready to consider a transition. So hopefully that's helpful in responding to that.
Thank you, Emerson. Thank you for an engaging conversation, and thanks to our guests who are joining in from around the country. I'd encourage you to reach out to Emerson. He has his email address up there, or feel free to reach out to MHS Consulting with further questions. We look forward to connecting with you again soon in July for our third event in this series. You can visit our website, mhsonline.org, for updates or to subscribe to our eConnections mailing list, where we will be posting details about this series and other upcoming events. So thank you so much and have a great day.
See y'all.